Thanks for the great introduction there. And that sort of imagining time exercise is a really good segue. I was asking for my password. Fun. Cool. It worked. So I'm Justin. That was a great introduction. I'm going to turn this program on so my computer doesn't fall asleep. Really excited to be here today. I am going to show you some work from a journalism project that I've been working on for the past 4 years. It has not published yet, so y'all are getting a sneak peek at something that should publish at the end of the month or early June. I'm going to get into it here, if it will let me. Hang on. The work is funded by the Pulitzer Center and the Solutions Journalism Network. They have a climate solutions cohort that I'm a part of. And essentially, for the past 4 years, I've been working on a 3-part reporting project in Princeville, North Carolina, which is the oldest town in America founded by formerly enslaved Black people. People forced to live in a swampy floodplain. Flooding from the Tar River unleashed by hurricanes and worsened by climate change threatens to erase this historic town from the map. The project, again, is a partnership between the Pulitzer Center Solutions Journalism Network and NC Newsline. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of NC Policy Watch. They're like an amazing watchdog journalism outlet here in North Carolina. They do incredible environmental journalism and climate reporting. They're now on NC Newsline. And my old editor, Lisa Sorg from the Indie Week, is my editor for this project, and she's a total badass. Love her so much. Big shout out to Lisa Sorg. So I'm going to show you just a really quick run through of some photographs from Princeville, and then we're going to really get into the meat of the story, which is something entirely different. So the main story explores how these floods happen in Princeville from the Tar River, how climate change makes them worse, what the town and locals are doing to adapt to climate change. These are actually some sharecroppers from some archival photos I dug out of the Edgecombe Memorial Library, not too far from Princeville. So essentially, what the town and like individuals are doing to adapt to climate change and flooding, but also people's whose lives have been upended by the flooding. This is a home in Princeville that was flooded by Hurricane Matthew that's still there. You can see the mold from the water line, the height of the flooding. This is Marquetta and Kendrick. They founded an organization called Freedom.org. Danielle knows all about them. We love Freedom.org. They're doing amazing work in Princeville, in the Tar River. Portrait of them. Just two of many individuals in the town that are kind of working to make the town more self-sufficient and adapt to flooding. Mayor Jones, Bobby Jones, he came into office just before Hurricane Matthew, and has had like a really challenging time helping the town recover. This is him at the levee that does not actually protect the town, even though it's supposed to. Ann Adams, she grew up in Princeville, lived there all her life. She is in part of this completely mismanaged, corrupt rebuild NC program that is supposed to help hurricane survivors get back into their homes, but it has absolutely failed to do so effectively. And we've been reporting with her and essentially trying to get them to do something about her house. We made a little bit of progress, so hopefully by the time the story publishes, the construction on her house will be fully underway. Kendrick, one of the stories we're working on with Kendrick is about his organic farm, and since it's a climate solution story, focusing on how his farming techniques actually help sequester carbon dioxide in the soil, which is one of the biggest carbon sinks on Earth. Black farmers have been doing this for a long time. They have a lot of answers to these issues, but they, have had to deal with like land theft, lack of reparations, and lack of funding. And basically, governments don't actually support them. But the story also just kind of captures like daily life in Princeville as well, whether it's through historical photos or the rodeo dance at True Vegas Event Center on a Friday night in February, which is the place to be. Just saying. They had a Western rodeo dance night there. So like all the rodeo dance crews from Tarboro and Rocky Mount came out. I mean, like sassy old 70-year-old women just getting down and two-stepping to hip hop, and it was just. I called my friend Cornell Watson in Durham. I was like, "Yo, you gotta get to Princeville. I know it's 11 o'clock at night." And he like got in the car and drove down, and we like photographed it for like 3 hours. And then we were like, should we go to Waffle House? And he's like, no, dog, I'm too tired. Let's go home. But the story I want to talk to you about today is about Princeville, but it's also really about the land that it's situated on in Edgecombe County. It's so basically how this land was shaped over millions of years by the ocean. And I call this story the Whales of Fishing Creek. Fishing Creek is one of the main tributaries to the Tar River, and a lot of destruction to Fishing Creek has what actually exacerbates some of these floods when the Tar River actually floods the town. This story actually begins with fossil hunting, and I'm really glad my brother is here today. We're twins. He's my fossil hunting partner. That's right. Give him a little. It began with fossil hunting in a vision, and we'll get to the vision towards the end. But I'm essentially going to take you through an adventure through deep time, which made this exercise pretty perfect. But one of the first things I want to ask is, who in here likes whales? Okay, cool. So I was about to say, if someone didn't answer their hand, I wanted to know, like, who hurt you? What if I told you that whales are crucial to mitigating the climate crisis? All right, we got some people nodding along. Cool. You're probably wondering what Princeville has to do with all this. Well, essentially, as this slide says, Princeville was located 100 miles from the modern Atlantic coast, but it's situated over a prehistoric coastline from the Pliocene epoch, which is 3 to 4 million years old. Scientists are fascinated in the Pliocene, about the Pliocene, because essentially in the mid-Pliocene warm period, so about 3 million years ago, atmospheric carbon levels were the same as they are now, so around 420 parts per million. Sea levels were 70 feet higher, and an ocean covered Princeville. And there were basically whales and sharks, really gigantic sharks, swimming over where Princeville is today. But these same hurricanes that flood the town erode these massive whale bones and shark's teeth, as you can see over here. I built an altar of some over here you can kind of check out of the riverbanks. And it's a prime place to go fossil hunting. But it reveals an ancient marine world buried underneath Edgecombe County. So this is a vertebrae from a cetothere, which is an extinct species of Pliocene whale, which is, they're sort of a family that are ancestors to modern humpback whales, fin whales, basically big baleen whales that grew gigantic during the Pliocene, and we'll kind of get to that. This is a massive cotton field, literally right next to the place where I found that vertebrae. And cotton plays a key role in this story because essentially the story of whales and whaling in America is interconnected with cotton and with slavery. Essentially, whales are entangled in the climate emergency story because their fate dovetails with chattel slavery, with sugar, with cotton, and with coal, which are essentially key industries that drove colonialism, which is what created the climate crisis. It made possible the modern extractive racial capitalism, as Danielle calls it. Racial capitalism is crucial to think of it that way. That essentially destroyed southern landscapes and birthed our climate crisis. I kind of spell out how this happened here. Essentially, if it wasn't for cotton, there wouldn't have been an industrial revolution. You wouldn't have had an a climate crisis without these particular genocides against Black people, Native Americans, and whales. And the way this works is essentially like when these big industrial factories were built, they had to find a way to keep the machines lubricated. And whaling was the number one way they did that. They basically used whale oil to lubricate these machines, where they spun cotton picked by enslaved people in the South, including Edgecombe County. And these factories belched carbon dioxide into the sky. They led to the expansion of empires and capitalist economies, and ultimately our climate crisis. But we're going to talk about the Pliocene. So this is like the deep time spiral. It's like kind of a more appropriate way to look at time as opposed to like thinking about it in a linear fashion, because at the end of the day, like the Pliocene is somewhat prophetic, and history repeats itself and time repeats itself. So right there. It's about 3 to 4 million years ago. This kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So this pink line is the western Piedmont Fall line. So it separates the Piedmont from the coastal plain, but it's also an ancient shoreline from the Pliocene known as the Orangeburg Scarp. And you can kind of see Princeville and Tarboro right here on the Tar River. it's basically smack in the middle of the Yorktown Formation, which is essentially a layer of marine sediment that was deposited as the sea rose and fell across North Carolina over a period of like 2 to 5 million years ago. So that's that kind of that blue area, sort of in the middle of the state. And this is what it looks like. This is actually the bank of the Tar River, where it's been exposed. These are 3 million year old shells just spilling out of the creek bank. But what's really fascinating about this stuff is that these prehistoric ocean deposits, they're cut through by rivers like the Tar and its tributaries. They hold this archive of evolution. That if we study it, we can learn a lot about like the prehistoric past and potentially the future. They essentially have a memory. They're portals, for lack of a better word. And often, like where my brother and I fossil hunt, these creeks and rivers will be like in the middle of the forests, like in the woods. Some of them are like further away from land. Some of them are closer to the road, that sort of thing. But Danielle and I talked a bunch before our presentations today, and there's some direct relationship she'll get into in her project about how like these wooded areas are sort of enchanted and haunted and full of memory. And this is just one memory that they hold from 3 million years ago. This is a really large megalodon shark tooth that Elena was here with me when I found that. Pulled it right out of the riverbank and started screaming. And that's another one. I named that one Buffy the Whale Slayer, because megalodons ate cetatheres and smaller rorqual whales like humpbacks and stuff like that. And there's your evidence. That's actually a piece of whale jawbone with teeth marks on it from a megalodon. These are 2 different species of white shark. One on the right is a great white, and the one on the left is a sort of the species that existed before it, and it evolved into a white shark because of climate change. Essentially, oceans grew colder. They competed with megalodons for the same food source. They grew serrations in their teeth, and were basically megalodons went extinct because of competition from these animals. So, but you can learn all about that here in North Carolina, just in the rivers. And this is what my brother and I call a whale spud. It's actually part of a whale's inner ear bone called the bulla bone. This is from an extinct species of rorqual or some sort of like baleen whale. And that's another piece of an ear bone. These things are really weird when they break. They actually look like a human earlobe when they get shattered and eroded by the river. It's kind of creepy. Another thing that's really cool about these layers is that they're full of carbon, like basically calcium carbonate and phosphate. And there was a massive cotton boom in Edgecombe County in the mid-1800s because they realized this stuff was fertilizer. So they sent enslaved people to the creeks and rivers to dig this stuff out, most likely some of the same places that we fossil hunt. And there was actually, I think cotton, like in Edgecombe County, like tripled or quadrupled in output once they realized they could basically use this marine marl stuff and compost. So there's this, literally the dust of the Pliocene, these extinct creatures like lives on through like the clothing, the food, the things that like built us and our ancestors. And they still use phosphate and stuff like that from the mines in Eastern North Carolina as fertilizer. This is actually a whale arm bone. It's like the humerus bone. Would have been like equivalent to this part of a human arm. Big vertebrae. This next one's wild. It's a C3 vertebrae. It's like the neck vertebrae from a minke whale. So a minke whale is sort of like a smaller baleen whale, very closely related to these old cetathere ancestors. So we're going to talk about how whales are part of the climate solution. Essentially, they have this like reciprocal relationship with plankton, and that's a lot to read and a lot for me to like read to you. But the cliff notes are that basically phytoplankton create 50% of the oxygen we breathe by basically consuming CO2 and sunlight. And that carbon that they suck up from the atmosphere gets passed up the food chain through krill and through fish into these giant baleen whales. And these whales essentially like die and fall to the seafloor and lock all that carbon away for millennia. and it's kind of an amazing process. They call it the whale pump. So essentially, like 40% of our CO2 emissions every year get sucked up by these little plankton, and these giant whales like swim around. They lunge feed these massive swarms of zooplankton, and they sequester all this carbon in their bodies. This is what phytoplankton looks like. I actually went to the UNC Marine Lab and photographed some with a microscope. They're actually really beautiful. This is a picture of me trying to explain all this to you right now. Yeah. People, they're not falling asleep, so that's good. It's me trying to explain the whale poop climate connection, because what's really cool about these animals, essentially, whales, the reciprocation is that whales poop a lot. These big baleen whales poop all over the surface, like constantly pooping. So I went out to California last November and was trying to photograph humpback whales, and sure enough, I caught one diving and pooping. And their poop is full of iron, which is a crucial nutrient in the sort of water column for plankton. So the whales eat the larger zooplankton, these small fish, and then they poop everywhere. And this reciprocal relationship, it sort of fertilizes the water column, and phytoplankton bloom. So basically, scientists, this is some really delicious whale poop. I know y'all weren't ready for this on a Saturday, but here we are. It's the anyways. So yeah, this is the key point. The idea is save the whales again. According to the IMF, if we were to basically restore whale populations to they were before, like pre-industrial whaling numbers, basically it would increase phytoplankton populations. It would be the equivalent to 2 billion mature trees appearing on the planet, sucking up CO2. They could sequester like 1.7 billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere annually. And this is like some emerging science that they're just now trying to understand. But I think it's really important as journalists to figure out, well, how do we illustrate these things? How do we show people that essentially the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and like our crises with like racial justice are kind of all entwined, and they're actually one big crisis? Because the same mindset that led white people to enslave Black people, to kill whales en masse, to found basically create an apartheid town like Princeville. It's the same mindset that created the climate crisis. Okay, this is really fun. Hang on a second. This actually is from 2 weeks ago. This is a 50-foot long fin whale that I filmed with a drone. And there's no audio because drones don't do audio. But these animals are twice the size of what these extinct whales were. And because of these, essentially this really warm, hot Pliocene epoch that slowly cooled into the Pleistocene, into the Holocene, into the people, what they call the Anthropocene today, evolved to get really large like this because of this increased productivity and lack of predators. So these whales that essentially, the first whales emerged in the Eocene, Oligocene, Eocene, about 50 million years ago, when basically our climate was a hothouse. So like you're talking 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees like Celsius, like global temperatures. So whales, like they know what it's like to live in a hot climate, but the changes we've made to our atmosphere, this sort of chemical experiment we're doing, is unlike anything they've experienced. So climate change is a huge risk to whales, but whales also know things we don't. They've been around a lot longer than we have. The ocean has covered eastern North Carolina for millions of years, and we're essentially a speck and all that. But there's just so much we don't know. But I want to show you, let me show you these last two. So this whole idea of vision, a lot of times when I fossil hunt, the past and the present kind of like fold over with the future, and my imagination and reality sort of bleed together. And I keep having this vision of like standing in the creek, looking out over the tree line and daydreaming. driving home past cotton fields blowing by the window and just thinking about like all the whales and whale bones that are buried beneath all these cotton fields and sort of the secrets and the memories they hold. And I wanted to find a way to illustrate that. And I kept imagining these whales like swimming through the sky, over the woods, over the old plantations, through deep time itself, like over Civil War battles, over slave rebellions, over the old Victorian homes in Tarboro, over Princeville. So I hired an illustrator to like illustrate this as the main art for the story, and this is the first time anyone's seeing it publicly. So it's a river baptism with a bunch of rorquals and cedar swimming over it. And the baptism image, I hired an illustrator, Bex Glendinning. She's amazing. She was based in the UK. And the idea was like, so often I hear people in Princeville talk about how the Tar River and the flooding baptized them. And they talk about it very differently. So I was trying to think like, how do we portray that? But there's a picture of me fossil hunting, looking like a dork. I have a whale shirt on, a fanny pack, basically a fashion icon. Do what I can. But the point of this presentation, like, a lot of climate reporting stresses me out. Not because the doom and gloom, we need to understand that stuff, but like there's a lack of imagination and a lack of connection between ideas. And one of the things I'm trying to do in my work is sort of rekindle that sense of imagination and like childlike wonder about like how amazing like this planet is, like how resilient things are, how much terrible damage we've done to it, but trying to imagine different futures for ourselves and imagine like the people that we have, white people that have like worked so hard to marginalize, imagining them like having a more central role, having our nature restored and people like living in a more symbiotic way with the natural world because what we're doing right now isn't working. And a lot of this fossil hunting, it's helped me kind of come to grips with like my own climate emotions. I don't know if you've ever heard of Britt Ray. She's a climate psychologist. She has this really amazing newsletter called Gen Dread. It's basically about like reaching people who, trying to talk to them about climate emotions and climate psychology. But she has this quote that the vastness of the cosmos puts the inconsequence of our civilization into sharp and calming focus. And when I think about deep time, trying to imagine the Pliocene Ocean over eastern North Carolina, like just kind of like close your eyes and think about like, what would that look like? What would it look like if none of that was there? Like that sort of childlike wonder, it gives me energy to kind of imagine a future that's better as well. So that's kind of what I got. Basically, at the end of the day, eastern North Carolina is just an old ocean bottom, and we're just trying to live there. So that's the message. Thanks for listening.